Welcome to Unspoken Heart, where every story speaks the language of love, pain, and everything in between. Here we tell realistic and emotional love stories inspired by real-life experiences. Stories of betrayal, heartbreak, forgiveness, second chances, and unspoken feelings. Each narration is carefully written to touch your soul, make you feel seen, and remind you that you're not alone in your emotions. Whether you've loved deeply, lost painfully, or are healing silently, these stories will stay with you long after they end. Our goal is simple: to give voice to every unspoken heart. Sometimes the cruelest betrayals don't come from the people we love. They come from the promises life couldn't keep. If you've ever loved someone deeply, if you've ever had your world shattered by circumstances beyond your control, this story will touch something raw inside you. Let's begin. Emma and Daniel met in the most ordinary way, at a coffee shop where they both reached for the last blueberry muffin. They laughed, decided to split it, and 3 hours later were still talking like they'd known each other forever. That was 7 years ago. They built a life that felt unshakable, a small apartment in the city they both loved, Sunday morning farmers markets, dancing in the kitchen to songs only they understood. They weren't rich, but they were happy, the kind of happy that makes other people jealous. Daniel proposed on the beach where they had their first real date. Emma said yes before he even finished asking. They set a date for the following summer, June 14th. Emma had already picked out her dress. Simple, elegant, exactly her style. "We're going to grow old together," Daniel would say, pulling her close at night. Rocking chairs on a porch, arguing about whose turn it is to make coffee. "You'll always make the coffee," Emma would laugh. "You're better at it." Fair point. Everything was perfect until it wasn't. It started with exhaustion. Emma blamed it on work stress. Long hours at the hospital where she worked as a nurse meant she was constantly on her feet. But this was different, a bone-deep tiredness that sleep couldn't fix. Then came the headaches. Not the normal kind you take aspirin for and forget about. These were blinding, debilitating attacks that left her curled up in dark rooms, unable to function. "You need to see a doctor," Daniel insisted one morning after finding her vomiting from the pain. "I'm fine, it's just stress," she said, though her hands trembled as she reached for water. "Emma, you're a nurse. Would you tell your patients this is normal?" She went quiet. They both knew the answer. The appointment was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Daniel took off work to go with her. They sat in the waiting room holding hands, trying to convince themselves it was nothing. Maybe migraines, maybe she needed glasses, maybe just exhaustion. The doctor ordered tests. CT scan, MRI, blood work. "Just to be thorough," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. They waited a week for results. The longest week of their lives. Emma tried to stay positive, planning wedding details, picking out flowers, pretending everything was normal. But Daniel noticed how she'd stop mid-sentence sometimes, her hand going to her temple, her eyes squeezing shut against pain she wouldn't admit to. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. "Can you both come in tomorrow? I'd like to discuss the results in person." In person, never a good sign. They barely slept that night. Emma curled into Daniel's chest, both of them pretending they weren't terrified, both knowing that doctors don't ask you to come in for good news. Friday morning felt like walking to an execution. They held hands in the elevator, held hands in the waiting room, held hands as they followed the doctor into his office where he had papers laid out on his desk. Scans, reports, things they couldn't understand but knew were bad. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this," he began, and Emma felt her world start to crumble. "Glioblastoma, it's a type of brain tumor. Aggressive. Stage 4. The words landed like bullets. Emma heard them but couldn't process them. Brain tumor, aggressive. Stage 4. Daniel's hand tightened around hers. "What does that mean? What are the treatment options?" The doctor's expression was carefully neutral, the look of someone who delivered this news too many times before. "We can pursue aggressive treatment, chemotherapy, radiation, possibly surgery depending on the location. But I need to be honest with you both about the prognosis." "How long?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The pause before he answered told them everything. "With treatment, 6 months to a year. Without treatment, possibly less." 30 years old. Emma was 30 years old. They were supposed to get married in 8 months. They were supposed to have children, buy a house, grow old arguing about coffee on that porch Daniel always talked about. Instead, they had 6 months. Maybe a year if they were lucky. The drive home was silent. What do you say when your entire future evaporates in a single doctor's appointment? When forever becomes a deadline? That night, Emma broke down. She'd held it together at the doctor's office, stayed calm during the drive. But the moment they walked through their apartment door, the apartment where they'd built their life, where they'd planned their future, she shattered. Daniel caught her as her legs gave out, lowered them both to the floor and held her while she sobbed. Great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep and primal, the sound of dreams dying. "This isn't fair," she cried into his shoulder. "We were supposed to have more time. We were supposed to have everything." "We'll fight this," Daniel said, his own tears falling into her hair. "We'll do the treatment, we'll find the best." They started treatment immediately. Chemotherapy that made Emma violently sick. Radiation that left her exhausted and weak. Hospital visits that became their new normal. Emma's hair fell out in clumps. She cried the first time, then decided to shave it all off. "If I'm doing this, I'm doing it on my terms," she said, trying to smile through tears. Daniel thought she'd never looked more beautiful. They tried to keep living, tried to pretend that everything was normal. But normal was gone, replaced by pill schedules and scan results and doctors who spoke in careful, measured tones that never quite said, "Hope." The wedding was still 8 months away, now 6 months, now 4. Emma insisted they move it up. "I want to marry you," she said one night. "Not in June, now, while I still can." They planned a small ceremony, just immediate family and close friends. City Hall, nothing fancy. Emma wore a simple white dress, not the one she'd picked out because she'd lost too much weight for it to fit properly. But she was radiant, smiling, present. Daniel cried through his vows. Emma held his hands and promised to love him for as long as she had. Not forever. She couldn't promise forever anymore. Just as long as she had. "I do," she said, and meant it with everything she had left. They had 3 months as husband and wife. 3 months of stolen moments, of Emma getting weaker, sleeping more, the cancer spreading despite every treatment they threw at it. 3 months of Daniel learning to be a husband and a caregiver, of sleeping in hospital chairs, of memorizing every detail of her face because he knew, they both knew, time was running out. On a cold November morning, Emma woke up and couldn't remember Daniel's name. The tumor had spread, was affecting her memory, her speech, her ability to recognize the person she loved most. "Who are you?" she asked, looking at him with confused, frightened eyes. It broke him, completely shattered him, but he smiled through it. "I'm Daniel, your husband, and I love you." "Oh," she said softly, "you seem nice." 2 weeks later, she slipped into a coma. Daniel sat beside her bed, holding her hand, talking to her even though she couldn't respond, telling her stories about their life together, reminding her of the coffee shop, the blueberry muffin, the beach proposal. She died on a Sunday morning, with morning light streaming through the hospital window and Daniel's hand in hers. Daniel kept his promise, the one Emma made him give. He eventually learned to live again. Not the same way, never the same, but he lived. He still thinks about her every single day. Still has her wedding ring on a chain around his neck. Still makes coffee the way she liked it, even though there's no one to share it with. Some loves don't get happy endings. Some loves get cut short by things beyond our control. By illness, by time, by cruel twists of fate that don't care about promises or plans or futures we thought we had. But those loves still matter. They shape us, change us. Teach us that love isn't measured in years, but in moments. In blueberry muffins and kitchen dancing and hands held in hospital rooms. If this story touched you, if you've loved someone you lost too soon, leave a comment below. Share your story. Let's support each other through the grief that never fully goes away. And if you're new to Unspoken Heart, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We share stories like this every week. Real, raw, honest stories about love and loss and everything in between. Thank you for listening. Until next time, remember, the hearts that break us are often the ones that made us feel most alive.